Good evening. I'm Neil Ruiz, the Executive Director of the Center for Law, Economics, and Finance here at the Law School. The center is a think tank designed to be a focal point in Washington, D.C. for the study and debate of major issues in economic policy, business and financial law, and now entrepreneurship, confronting the United States and the global community. Thank you all for attending this exciting event, and I'm thrilled to help launch the Falk Academy of Management and Entrepreneurship. Just a reminder, immediately after this event, we're going to have a reception outside, just upstairs in the Brady Art Gallery. So I would like to thank President Knapp, Dean Morant, and of course David Falk for helping launch the Academy. Without further ado, please welcome George Washington University's President, Stephen Knapp.
Thank you very much, Neil. And ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to join you this evening to celebrate the launch of the Falk Academy of Management and Entrepreneurship, or FAME, at the George Washington University Law School. I'm pleased to acknowledge Trustee Wes Burnett and, of course, David Falk, whom I first had the pleasure of meeting in 2008 when he was inducted into the GW School of Business's Sports Executive Hall of Fame. David, we're very grateful to you and to Rhonda for your vision and generosity. We're sorry that she could not be here tonight, but hope you'll give her our warmest regards.
Absolutely.
David is a world-renowned sports agent and an innovative and entrepreneurial business leader. While he's best known for redefining the role of marketing in sports, he's also represented some of the NBA's biggest stars, including Allen Iverson, Juwan Howard, and Michael Jordan. FAME will be housed within GW's law business program and will provide students invaluable opportunities for hands-on experiential learning, which is a special interest of David's, and will connect them with industry leaders, with entrepreneurs, and with investors. We're very excited to have this important new program as a central part of our law school and of our George Washington University. And it's now my pleasure to turn the podium over to the 19th Dean of the George Washington Law School and the Robert Kramer Research Professor of Law, Blake Moran.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much, President Knapp. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to what is a very momentous day in the history of the law school. And I've got to say, when you're dean of a law school as wonderful as George Washington, you know that you're always going to have these opportunities to do something special. Well, today has been a very, very special day already. As many of you know, we had the finals of our Van Vleck moot court competition today, and it was judged by, with the head judge being U.S. Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito, and he was joined by two circuit judges, Judge Kavanaugh and also Judge Livingston. And so after that, I ran from that to this particular event, and I am very excited about this as well, for a different reason, but a similar reason. Because all of you know that George Washington Law School really symbolizes the dynamics that go on in this city. And we had that today with the moot court competition, and we have that tonight with the launching of the Falk Academy of Management and Entrepreneurship. I want to give my own personal thanks to David and his wonderful wife, Rhonda, who couldn't be with us tonight, and I've had them swear to me that we're going to get together for dinner on our own to celebrate this tonight, and so we've made that vow. And I also want to tell you a little bit about David, beyond what the president has always said. And so one of the things, I've been dean of the law school now for a year and 6 months, and one of the things that I've noticed is that the progeny of this law school certainly does symbolize why it is so special in so many ways, and certainly David Falk symbolizes that in so many ways. Now, many of you have had a chance to meet David. If you have not, definitely stay for the reception so you'll get that opportunity to do that. So you notice that the Academy has in its title, the word entrepreneurship, which also, to me, takes in the whole idea of innovation and the whole idea of being ahead of the game. And certainly David Falk symbolizes that in such a big way. Now, as you've heard the president say, he has now built a reputation of being one of the finest sports agents and representatives in the country. There's no doubt about that, and you've heard about some of his clientele already. But the thing that really is very fascinating about this individual is not only is he a very good representative of individuals, but he's also an investor in their success and their future. And if you look at his whole background, it sort of says that. So as a law student, in addition to becoming a very good and committed student, he worked for a company that I knew for a very long time. It was Donna Dell's company called ProServe. And if any of you are tennis fans like I am, you'll know who that is and what it does. Now, we know that our students work while they're in school, and if any of my students are out here, I want you to close your ears at this point. But this individual worked at ProServe while he was a student for more than 20 hours a week. I won't tell you how many hours it was. He would admit it to me now, but we didn't know that then. And it launched him in this career that has now taken him to heights that we all are very, very proud of. As you heard, one of his clients was Michael Jordan, or is Michael Jordan, and we all know Michael Jordan for who he is. But again, the idea is not only representation, but thinking innovatively. The idea of thinking outside the box so that you can maximize not only the individual's achievements, but also show that you're invested in this individual beyond the immediacy of what they're doing. So as a representative of Michael Jordan, many of you have heard of Air Jordan. That was it. That kind of concept was never thought of by representatives before he came on the scene, and he did that for Michael Jordan. Many of you may have remembered a movie called Space Jam. And if you remember this movie, you had Michael Jordan with Bugs Bunny in it. Who else would be innovative enough to say that you should have Michael Jordan and Bugs Bunny in the same film? And it was a smashing success. But I say this in terms of looking at why this academy is going to be so good for us in terms of looking at what we can offer our students. Certainly right now, everybody has heard a lot about legal education and where it is and what we're trying to do with it. And as the past president of the Association of American Law Schools, one of the things that I've always said is that law schools that are going to be relevant are those law schools that look innovatively at what they do to really move the needle, to provide more than what's really expected, to being able to give students that kind of encouragement that they need in order to think entrepreneurially about utilizing their degree with their talents to move the needle. Certainly, David Falk is one of those individuals who's done that. And I am very gratified that he and his wife, Rhonda, have found it propitious to really invest in what we consider to be a very focal point of pushing that envelope, of marrying everything that we have already done in terms of the excellent business personnel and excellent business curriculum that we have, to now have this academy, the Falk Academy of Management and Entrepreneurship. Before I call him up to the table, I want to tell you this. I've had an opportunity in this last year and a half to meet many individuals, and David and I have had many meetings in this past time. I have never failed to be entertained in one of them. And one of the things that I find in my conversation with him is not only a commitment to maximizing the innovations that are done within his realm, but wanting for students at his alma mater to have that same spark and that same spirit. It is what legal education needs. It is what GW symbolizes, and it gratifies me greatly as dean of this law school that we have him partnering with us to make that happen. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a very warm GW greeting to our benefactor, David Falk.
University that we could make the Falk Academy here at GW a place where very talented young students from around the country and around the world want to come. I think that Washington, D.C. is the best place in America to go to law school. The opportunity to get practical experience while you're here to work for government agencies or nonprofits is unmatched, and I'm a very strong believer in experiential learning. I loved going to school at GW, gave me a great foundation for my career. I never thought that being in the world of sports, that taking courses like antitrust or collective bargaining would have any practical impact, but I was wrong. And I think I had a great preparation for my career here at GW, and we're just very proud that we can reciprocate. Good evening. I appreciate you all braving the elements to get here tonight, as we're expecting a lot of snow.
For me, being a good planner, I'm leaving at 5 a.m. tomorrow for the Dominican Republic to avoid the snow. I see a few friends from school. Welcome. Thank you for coming. So I'm going to chat a little bit, and I hope that at the end, the students in the room who have questions, we get into a little bit of an interactive dialogue. I have no problem speaking. I get paid to speak, to talk. Some people get paid to make things. I get paid to talk. Lawyers are universally trained to analyze precedents, things that happened a long time ago, in order to determine the outcome of factually related cases. You come to law school the very first day, not knowing what to expect, and you learn about Hadley versus Baxendale in like 1792. And 100 years from now, when students show up at law school, the first day they're going to learn about Hadley versus Baxendale. Entrepreneurs predicate their success on predicting future events as opposed to looking in the past. Enzo Ferrari, who created the Ferrari, when he created his very first prototype Ferrari, he sat in the car and he felt the leather and he felt the stick shift. He sort of looked around and he was uncomfortable. There was something wrong. Couldn't sort of figure out why. And finally he reached up and he grabbed the rear view mirror and he ripped it off its hinges. And he said, when you're driving a Ferrari, you never have to look behind you. As someone who's a lawyer by training and an entrepreneur by profession, I've tried to use the past 41 years of my career, the experiences I've had, as a guideline to try to determine where the business that I'm in is going down the road. And Bill Gates wrote a really interesting book called The Road Ahead. If you haven't read it, I'd highly recommend it. And I've always tried in my career to see not so much what people had done before me, but where the road was going and where I should position myself and my clients in order to maximize the opportunities. And so I think that finding the intersection between what's happened in the past that teaches you and what's going to happen in the future, that's the challenge. And having a legal education here at GW, I think that the word that I'm searching for is called nexus, the connection between the past and the present. As Dean Moran pointed out, not being an academic, being a person who's worked his whole life since I'm 9 years old, I think textbooks are great. I think universities are great. Professors are important. But during the 4 years that I went to college at Syracuse and the 3 years I went to law school here at GW, I took one course in education in 1970. It was a long time ago. And though I've been very privileged in my career to be able to endow two schools at Syracuse and here at GW, I'm not an academic. I don't ever expect to be an academic. I'm a practitioner. And as a result, I have placed very strong emphasis both in hiring people and in trying to shape the curriculums of these two schools I've been involved with along the lines of experiential learning. Some of you might have read a great book by Malcolm Gladwell called Tipping Point. And he talks about how incredibly successful people require 10,000 hours of training to become the best in the world at what you do. And he points to a number of really interesting examples. The Beatles, probably the most successful music group in history, weren't very successful in the early 60s. And they went to Hamburg. Their manager sent them to Hamburg to play in this really cheesy club called The Cave. And they probably played for 8 to 10 hours a night for measly wages. But over the course of a year or two, they worked out all the kinks in their music and their presentation, and they went from being the Fab Four to the Beatles. Bill Gates and his good friend Paul Allen grew up in Seattle to a reasonably affluent family, and their parents arranged for them to get computer time at a computer lab when they were very young, and they spent every waking moment in the computer lab and became, two of the pioneers in the computer age. So the Falk Academy will definitely emphasize experiential learning in terms of having people like me teach, have an advisory board to be mentors and advisors to the program, having capstones, and encouraging the people to get out beyond the four walls of the classroom here in Washington, D.C., and find activities that will amplify their learning. My theory, and I've shared this with the last 4 deans here at the law school, My own personal theory is that Washington, D.C. is the center of the universe for the study of the law. 600 years ago, there was a very gutsy Prussian astronomer and mathematician named Nicholas Copernicus. At that time, everybody thought that the center of the universe was the Earth. The church espoused that, and Copernicus came along and developed this thing called the heliographic theory, that the sun was the center of the universe. He was virtually excommunicated for doing it. And even though the traditional rankings, U.S. News and World Report, whatever the other indexes are, there's no law schools ranked in the top 10 in Washington, D.C. in the traditional index. But in the Falk index, I think that Washington, D.C. was a place where if I was advising a student to go to law school, I would advise them to go to law school in Washington, D.C. because we have all the federal agencies here. We have Congress. When I was in school, and I don't know if this has gotten better or worse, there was an unsubstantiated statistic that in the city of Washington, D.C., 1 out of every 25 males over the age of 25 is a lawyer. So there's a lot of law firms here, a lot of lawyers. There are think tanks, there are public service industries, nonprofits, and it's a place to get out of the classroom and get a practical amplification of what you're learning in the classroom and to do things. I'd like to talk a little bit about the impact of my legal education here on my own career. Never really gave it a lot of thought until I was chatting with the dean, and he said, I think the students would really be interested in, like, what did you take away from law school? So I want to tell you, like, 4 or 5 interesting stories. I hope they're interesting. Not, the lights are so bright, if you fall asleep, I probably wouldn't see it. But okay, so I do have to say, because I have 3 really good friends that are sitting in the audience here, and they know when I was in school, I clerked at this small law firm that became ProServe. And I worked my buns off for about a year and a half, and because I didn't go to Princeton or Harvard, like they were trying to hire some Ivy League types, and finally the guy turned the job down, and my friends would have burned the building down if I didn't get the job. They knew I'd killed myself for this. It was what I always wanted to do from the day I showed up. So early on in my career as a lawyer, there's a famous company called Adidas. Anybody hear of the company Adidas? You probably call it Adidas, but that's mispronounced. It's called Adidas. And the reason it's called Adidas is because the founder of the company was a German guy named Adolf Dassler, whose nickname was Adi. Now they have the shoes, they call them Adi. So his son was named Horst Dassler, and he moved the company from Herzogenaurach, Germany, across the river in the Black Forest to Landersheim, France. And we represented Horst Dassler, who was probably, in the history of sports, with the possible exception of Phil Knight, probably the most powerful man in sports history. And what happened was, at that time, we have a governmental agency called the International Trade Commission, and they're tasked with protecting American industries from unfair competition. And so in the shoe industry, not just the athletic shoe industry, a lot of the American manufacturers complained in the mid-'70s that the foreign competition had an unfair advantage. They had subsidized labor, they had below minimum wages, a whole bunch of different complaints. And because the athletic shoe industry got sort of caught in this web, we had to make a presentation in front of the International Trade Commission on behalf of Adidas to prove that they weren't exemplifying unfair trade practices. So Adidas had 4 American distributors, and the principal one was in New Jersey with a company, it was in Lansing, Michigan, a company called Vanco. And the head of Vanco was a gentleman named Gary Dietrich, who was a very conservative Midwest kind of guy. And the last thing that he wanted to do was to stand up in front of the International Trade Commission and testify. So Gary shows up like Santa Claus with this big sack of shoes. And Adidas at that time prided itself on having their shoes be like extremely specialized. You didn't just wear a pair of, quote, tennis shoes. So if you were running the 100 meters, you had a different level of spikes than if you were running the 400 meters. And if you were doing the hammer throw, you had a different kind of shoe than if you were throwing the javelin. So Dietrich got up and told the whole history of Adidas and how specialized the shoes were. And the gentleman who represented the American companies was a guy named Donald DeKeefer, who ended up becoming the chairman of the International Trade Commission later on. And it's an informal administrative hearing, but there was a level of question that was sort of akin to cross-examination. So on cross-examination, DeKeefer looks at Mr. Dietrich and says, he picks up just a random shoe. It happened to be a tennis shoe. And he says to Gary, are you trying to tell this board that American companies are incapable of making a tennis shoe like this? And Dietrich sort of straightened his tie and he fixed his glasses. He said, excuse me, Mr. DeKeefer, that's a basketball shoe. And the hearing was over. We won the hearing. So we had to brief the case. We had to do a lot of economic research. It was really a lot of fun. In 1985, I was privileged to represent my very biggest client that I signed totally on my own here at Washington, named Patrick Ewing, who went to Georgetown. And Patrick signed on Wednesday, September 18th, 1985, the highest contract ever given to a player in the NBA by 50%. Not the highest rookie contract, the highest playing contract. We blew out the salary structure for Patrick Ewing's contract. So I went up to New York, signed the contract, and he had a $5 million signing bonus. The player who'd been drafted the year before, who probably was a better player in the pros than him, was a guy named Akeem Olajuwon. He signed a 6-year contract for a total of $7 million. So Patrick made almost as much in his signing bonus as Olajuwon made for his whole contract. So Patrick grabs the check, and I said, what are you doing? Give me that check. I turned it over, wrote for deposit only. Now, the backstory was, unlike what most people think about agents, when Patrick was a junior, and John Thompson is my hero in life, the dad, and he's my client, he called me up and he said, what do you think about Patrick leaving college as a junior? I met Patrick for like 5 minutes at Mitch Kupchak's going away party in Georgetown. The only time I ever met him or talked to him. I said, I think it's a really bad idea. And John said, why do you think it's a bad idea? And I said, because I read in the Washington Post that he had promised his mother, he was the first person from his family to go to college. His mother was an immigrant from Jamaica, worked very, very hard, and his mom died in the middle of his junior year. And John said, you think that's the reason he should stay in school? If he makes $1 million a year, he can get plenty of education. So we got into a very lengthy discussion. And those of you who have ever seen John or met him or heard about him, he is not a wallflower when it comes to expressing his opinion. And we got into it. So here we are in a role reversal where I am advocating the player to stay in school and the coaches tell him he wants him to come back. And he's cursing me out like a truck driver. And it was the most unpleasant conversation I think I've ever had. So I said to John finally, look, coach, do whatever the hell you want to do. I'll tell you 3 things. His value will never go down as a franchise center. He's not going to get amnesia at age 21 and forget how to play, and we could buy insurance for him to protect him from getting hurt. So Patrick really didn't want to leave. John was really worried that something would happen and he'd lose this special position. So he goes back to college, and the NBA changes the rules for the draft. So prior to '85, the team with the worst record in the Western Conference would flip a coin with the team with the worst record in the Eastern Conference. And there was some very famous, for those of you who follow basketball closely like I do, there's been some very famous coin flips. Like, for example, in 1979, the Chicago Bulls flipped with the Lakers. The winner got Magic Johnson, which was the Lakers, and the loser got David Greenwood, which was Chicago. A lot of you probably never heard of David Greenwood. In 1969, 10 years before, the Milwaukee Bucks flipped with the Phoenix Suns. The winner got a guy named Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and the loser got Neil Walk, who went to Phoenix. So what happened was that the teams that knew they weren't going to make the playoffs started tanking the games at the end of the year to try to have the worst record to get into the coin flip. And David Stern, who was the brand new commissioner, was concerned. So we instituted this special lottery system where the 7 teams that didn't make the playoffs wouldn't flip a coin. They'd all go into a lottery, and they'd pick an envelope to see who got the number 1 pick. And so a lot of people have speculated how David Stern rigged the first lottery to make sure that the Knicks, who had won a total of 46 games over the 2 previous years, were going to win the lottery. Some people said that like when he reached into the drum, the Knicks envelope had dry ice so he could feel around which one was cold. Some people thought he had these special glasses and they had like infrared print. And we were sitting at this auxiliary gym at Georgetown watching this, and it got down to the last 2 teams, which were the Knicks and Indiana. And even Indiana has been a great franchise over the years. If you're Patrick Ewing and you grew up in Cambridge and you went to school in Washington in the Big East, you want to go to New York. And so New York obviously won the lottery, and we asked for this ridiculous contract for $3 million a year when the highest paid player would have made $2 million a year. And we got it. And so We sign on September 18th. They give Patrick the check. I steal it, make him sign it, come back to Washington. I literally got off the train and went straight to a photo engraver somewhere in Midtown, and I told him I want 3 copies of this check bronzed. So they took the check and they made identical bronze versions of the check, and they put them on this little walnut plaque. I kept one, I gave one to Patrick, and I sent one to Big John. And I said, "Dear John, I told you so. Love and kisses, David." Now, the plaque made the wall, but not the note. I don't want you to lose. The plaque's up on the wall. Okay, so that's on Wednesday, September 18th. On Friday, September 20th, on the back page of the New York Times was the following advertisement, full page. So there's a little pen and ink drawing of a bunch of kids playing basketball, and the copy says, "I wonder," this is in the middle of a famous TV show called Dallas. Anyone hear the show called Dallas? And the main character was a guy named J.R. Ewing. It's like a big oil family, sort of like the Bushes. So the copy says, "I wonder if he's one of those Ewings. With all the money they're paying him to play basketball, who needs oil?" Okay, and then the tagline was, "I hope he's as good as value as Ballantine Scotch." Now, those of you who follow sports know that the Bureau of Tobacco and Firearms prohibits active athletes from endorsing cigarettes or alcohol. So if they wanted to pay him $3 million for the next 100 years to do this ad, they couldn't. So I call up the company, and of course I get some junior lawyer on the phone, and I say, "Hey, by the way, like, what do you guys want to pay Patrick Ewing for this ad?" And so the lawyer says, "David, you wouldn't understand this because you're a sports agent, but this is called protected free speech." I said, "Really? Have you ever read the New York Civil Rights Law? Sections 50 and 51 prohibit, you just invaded his right of publicity." So I hired my best friend from law school, my friend's named Reed Kahn, he was a litigator, and we filed an action in the Southern District of New York against Ballantine Scotch, which was owned by 21 Brands, which was owned by McKesson, this enormous San Francisco conglomerate. When the papers get filed, those of you who get out of the classroom would know you have what's called a pretrial conference. And we sit in front of the pretrial conference with this very famous judge who looked like Albert Einstein, named Judge Edelstein, who had presided for 10 years over the famous IBM antitrust case. And the firm Cravath that represented IBM was so frustrated by Judge Edelstein that they filed a motion to have him dismissed from the case, and they lost, and they really got screwed at the outcome of the case. So the hearing starts, and Judge Edelstein turns to my friend Reed, GW graduate, and says, "Tell me what this case is about." And he said, "Well, the highest paid player in the history of the NBA is Patrick Ewing, and these people have used his likeness without permission." So the judge comes right back and says, "Well, how highly is he paid? What does he make?" And Reed said he makes $3 million a year. And the judge says, "Are you kidding me? $3 million a year? My law clerks only make $5 an hour." He thought that was outrageous that Patrick was making more than his law clerks. So right away, after the first 5 minutes of hearing, I knew, like, we're in trouble. This guy's like a little wacko. But then we go on, and so he turns to my friend and says, "Okay, where are we in the case?" And Reed says, "Well, we've just propounded interrogatories, to 21 Brands." And the judge looks askance and says, "Interrogatories in my court in the Southern District of New York? You must not have read my article in 1937 edition of the New York University Law Journal. I don't believe in interrogatories." Okay? "Is there anything else?" I said, "Yes, we're about to schedule some depositions in the case." "Depositions in my court? Haven't you read my 1927 in the Columbia University Law Journal? I don't believe in depositions." So we finished the hearing, and we step outside, and there must have been 50 lawyers, 21 Brands lawyers, McKesson's lawyers, Ballantine Scotch's lawyers. And I turned to these guys and said, "Look, I'd like to make a suggestion. Like, I don't believe in settling law cases, but I really think we should settle this case because one of us is going to end up in jail." So we settled the case, but the knowledge of intellectual property was very, very helpful to me in understanding how to manage this problem. Michael Jordan, we probably had about 15 of these, what I call commercial misappropriations, where companies use his likeness and then they want to tell you that it's okay. The first one, I can't name the company because we have a confidentiality agreement. Another full-page ad, USA Today, and they compared Michael to drinking a cold beverage produced by a very large beverage company, not Coca-Cola or Pepsi. And So I call up the company and said, hey, what do you want to pay Michael for this ad? He said, oh, David, you don't understand. You're just an agent. I said, here we go. So we meet in Chicago at the Westin Hotel, which is right on the Chicago River. And I'm here with this like general counsel type guy. He's probably making about $75,000 a year. Not very creative. I wouldn't say he wasn't intelligent, but he wasn't very creative. And he says to me, look, Dave, we'd like to settle this case. We'd like to offer you $3,500. So really? So like, I try not to get mad in my practice. I think it shows weakness. So I'm looking around, sort of counting to 10, and in the corner of my eye, at the other end of the restaurant while we're having breakfast, I spot a really good friend of mine who's the chairman of the board of Quaker Oats named Bill Smithberg. Quaker Oats, for those of you may know, not only make cereal, but they make a drink called Gatorade. And Michael has a small contract with Gatorade for 10 years. And Gatorade owns the building that the hotel is housed in. So I get Bill's attention. I have the way to go over, bring him over. I said, Bill, I'd like to ask you a question. How would you feel if you knew that you're paying all this money to Michael Jordan, that any company in the world could put him in a commercial, and if they get caught, they could solve the problem by paying him $3,500? And he didn't flinch. He said, well, I'd probably have every lawyer in this building on that case, and I'd put the company out of business. So we sell the case for 7 figures. And after that, every time somebody used Michael Jordan's likeness without permission, told him, look, I don't want to debate it. I don't want you to tell me I'm a dumb agent, doesn't understand commercial misappropriation. $1 million or we're going to court. So Michael gets inducted in the Hall of Fame about 4 or 5 years ago, and a local company in Chicago called Dominic's, which is a small supermarket chain that got bought by Safeway, decides to do another one of these congratulatory ads, and they have like an ugly steak at the bottom, and they say if you buy, it's a special commemorative issue of Sports Illustrated, you get $2 off the steak. So of course we sued. I was the expert witness at the case. Their expert witness testified that the value of this possibly improper ad was $160,000. Now, I negotiate for a living, and you could ask for whatever you want in negotiation, but to show you how close he was to the final outcome at $160,000, the jury awarded Michael $8.9 million in damages, which he gave 100% to charity. So I could tell you like 100 stories of these commercial misappropriations. Now, if I had never gone to law school, I would not have been savvy enough, experienced enough, knowledgeable enough to understand what the value of these things are. It's the value of a trademark. And when someone infringes your trademark and misappropriates your commercial value, I sort of became a lay expert. During the trial of this Dominic's case, for some reason that I have not figured out since we got the verdict at $8.9 million, there was one problem. We had another settlement of a company. I like to sound like a law professor. Let me give you the facts. So Michael had a ball deal with Wilson Sporting Goods to produce his basketball. We sublicensed Wilson to make sport watches, and their sublicensee was a company called MZ Berger. So Berger had the right to use Jordan's likeness on watches, except for one small. So they then turned around and put a full-page ad on the cover of Avon magazine for Mother's Day promoting the sale of Jordan watches. The only problem was they didn't ask us for approval of the ad, and the contract required that every use of his name, while it was authorized in the contract, had to be pre-approved by me, or they couldn't do it. And they had never asked us. And this goes out to thousands of Avon deals. So we sued, and we made a settlement for $10 million. So one of the problems in the case with Dominic's was that we sued under the Lanham Act. Anyone here study the Lanham Act? I haven't heard about the Lanham Act since I studied it with Professor Weston, like in 1975, but I sort of remember what it was. I can't say I'm an expert on the Lanham Act. And subsequent to that case, Illinois passed a right of privacy statute, sort of like the New York Civil Rights Law. So under the Lanham Act, you got punitive damages. There was difference in the statute of what you were allowed to collect. And under the Illinois right of privacy, it didn't exist. So our lawyers told us that there might be a problem using the Avon case as a precedent because it was under a different statute. and that the judge might have to issue limiting instructions to the jury if they found for Jordan that maybe the damages shouldn't be as high as the Avon case. And right in the middle of the cross-examination of me, the lawyer gets this brilliant idea that he's going to try to explain that the Avon case shouldn't be a precedent because we didn't bring the case under the Lanham Act. So he asked me some questions, and then he sits down, and the next thing is about to start, and the judge is going to allow the jury to ask me questions as an expert. And the lawyer said, "Oh, excuse me, Your Honor, I just have one or two more things. It would be okay if I..." So the judge rolls his eyes, said, "Okay." So the guy gets up and must have asked me like another half an hour of questions. And like trial lawyer, I've never been a trial lawyer. So for those of you in the room who are trial lawyers or whatever, like they try to be like Columbo, you know, they try to trap you. So like folds his arms. He goes, "Mr. Falk, let's try this on." And he stops for like a minute. I said, "Let's try what?" The jury cracks up. And he starts asking me a million questions about the Lanham Act. And finally, after like 20 minutes, I said, "You know, counselor, I haven't studied the Lanham Act since 1975, and I guarantee I know way more about it than the jurors who will look at you, they have a freaking clue what you're talking about." And that line of questioning cost him $8.9 million. So when you hear in class, when you're taking moot court, and they say, like, never ask a witness a question you know the answer to, trust me, you don't want to ask the question, unless you want your client to have to pay $8.9 million. Now, over my career being a lawyer, and I could tell my friends in the audience, like, we took contracts in 1975, and I must admit, when I finished contracts, I don't think I had a clue, even though I've worked with them for the rest of my life. I don't think the professor answered one question the entire semester. It was this whole Socratic stuff. And we walked out of this class. I don't want to name the professor because he's a great guy, but like, I could tell you, I didn't have a clue, like, what was the answer to any of the questions. That was not a great way of preparing me for contracts. But over the course of my career, as we did contracts for our clients, and in my day, prior to 1995, you're actually allowed to negotiate the contracts for the rookies. Today, we have a scale, so you don't have to have any training. The guy goes number 5, the contract is fixed, both in football and basketball. So in 1986, paragraph 13B of the NBA uniform player contract gives the teams the right to require the player to get permission before he does any interviews or endorses products. And the purpose of that is to protect the team in the local markets who may have a deal with Coke from you signing a deal with Pepsi and interfering with the arrangements. Now, in the city of Portland, which is one of the smallest markets in the NBA, we had a client named Darnell Valentine from Kansas who was a point guard, and we thought that they would never approve any endorsements for him, so we wanted to strike the contract out. We wanted to strike the clause out of the contract. Portland didn't want to do it, and we thought they were being arbitrary and unfair, so we filed an arbitration, and we won. So today, players have the right to cross out 20 words in paragraph 13B, and it's called the Darnell Valentine case. When Michael came along, Michael loved to practice and play. There's a paragraph in the uniform player contract that prohibits the player from playing basketball out of season without the team's permission. And when you have a player as important as Michael, the team had every right to say, "Hey, we don't want you practicing in North Carolina in the summer. We don't want Patrick to practice at Georgetown." And so we fought over that one, and we created a thing called the love of the game clause. So today when players do the contracts, they say, "Hey, I want the Jordan love of the game clause." In 1985, when we signed Patrick for this contract that was 50% higher than anyone had ever received before, it had been my experience from the past, from the precedent, that every deal that we had done that seemed really, really high, like we had James Worthy in 1982 with the Lakers. He signed for 3 times what Magic got in 1979, and by the time he got to his 3rd year, he was underpaid. Now, that's not to say anything about how underpaid Magic was when he signed his 25-year deal in 1982 for 1/3 of what Patrick got a year later. And so we created this thing called, what's now called an ETO, an early termination option. We signed a 10-year contract that allowed Patrick to terminate the deal after 6 years if 4 players had passed him in salary, not in compensation. So what happened was the league kept a really close eye on this. No one thought there was 1 chance in 100 that 4 players would make more than Patrick when he's already making 50% more than the highest paid player ever. But sure enough, by By the fifth year, 3 players had passed him, and a pretty good player came up for his contract named Larry Bird. And Bird only wanted to sign a 1-year deal, and the trigger point was $3 million. Bird signed a 1-year deal for $6 million. The league rejected the contract and sent it back, and mysteriously, the 1-year deal of $6 million turned into a 1-year deal for $2.8 and a $3.2 million signing bonus. And so they said, hey, he's not the fourth guy. And so we filed an arbitration. We hired a lawyer from Williams & Connolly, a good friend of ours named Steve Human, who sadly died a few years ago, who had argued 20 cases before the Supreme Court, and who definitely one-upped me in college because he went to Yale. And when he finished Yale, he simultaneously enrolled in Yale Law School and Yale Medical School. And he did that for about 9 months until the administration found out. And they told him he wasn't allowed to be in both schools, so he quit med school and became a lawyer. So Steve was a brilliant orator, and he wrote a great brief. And we stood up there trying to ask the arbitrator, what is the substantive difference in a 1-year contract between salary and a signing bonus? Now, if you have a 5-year contract, and those of you who follow fantasy football, if you're Kirk Cousins about to sign with the Redskins, and you get a $25 million signing bonus, they allocate it over the length of the contract. They prorate it. They amortize it. And so each year you have 1/5 or 1/8, whatever the length of the contract is. In a 1-year contract, you can't amortize anything. But we lost the arbitration, incredibly enough. And as a result of that, the Knicks, knowing they had just really pissed off their best player, they gave him a contract, and they took it from $3 million to $12.2. But it was very helpful as a lawyer to participate in the process, and very frustrating that we lost. So if I could give you my summation to the jury, because this is a law group, I'm very honored to have my name associated with this very, very exciting program at my alma mater. Unlike most benefactors who put their name on the building and then they walk away, you never hear from them again. Fortunately or unfortunately, I plan to be very actively involved. I plan to do some teaching. I plan to develop an advisory board of practitioners like I have on my advisory board at Syracuse. I have the president of Turner Broadcasting, the number 2 guy at ESPN, John Waltack, president of Fox, the president of the Buffalo Bills, a very famous agent named Sandy Montag, who represents John Madden and the Mannings and Bobby Knight. And I hope to create an advisory board here at GW with a bunch of people who are lawyers who have become entrepreneurs to sort of set an example for the students, people who could be mentors, advisors, possibly help you get jobs. And so I definitely plan to be very actively involved. What I don't plan to do, and I don't want to be a jerk to say this, my company today, in 2001, I had 900 employees and 1,100 clients. Today I have 1 employee who's a partner, a young woman, who's a valedictorian of a class at Penn, and my personal assistant. I'm not going to hire anyone. No internships, no associates. My office doesn't have any room. It's planned that way. So I'm going to be as involved as I could be, but no jobs. My challenge to you is to use the resources here at GW and the resources external to the walls in Washington, D.C. There are a million opportunities to expand your education outside the classroom and to get involved. I worked here, early in my first year. I worked for the Bureau of Land Management doing land leases. I worked for a firm called Sidley & Austin. When the summer came, being a little bit of a non-Ivy League type, having gone to Syracuse and GW, when I was at Sidley, I did all sorts of research throughout the year. I used to do messenger work, and the young associates would give me research projects. When the summer came, they hired 2 guys from Penn and Virginia, and the research stopped. And I asked them, hey, what happened to all the research? I said, oh, Dave, you have to understand, we've hired the Ivy League guys now. Those guys are really smarter than you are. So I said, okay. And when my career started taking off at ProServe, and I was representing James Worthy and Michael Jordan and Patrick Ewing and Chris Dolman and James Lofton, they asked if I wanted to come back as an associate. I said, no, I think you should stick to the Ivy League types. So I'm a little bit of a reverse snob person. I think GW is a great school. They don't have the name value of Harvard or Yale. And it's really incumbent upon you guys, you men and women, to take advantage of the opportunities inside the classroom and, more important, outside the classroom, because the study of law is multifaceted. It's multi-layered. It's not just reading a textbook or learning about what happened in 1789. We're in the information age. Things change so quickly. Your challenge is to keep up with what's going on and to figure out where are things going that you could position yourself for a great career when your education ends. I'd like to thank the dean, and I'd like to thank his predecessors, Fred Lawrence and Dean Young, Jack Friedenthal. We've been having this discussion about this program. What happens when you give money, in case you guys decide to give money, and everyone should give money, even if you gave $10 when you're done, you should participate. I gave money to my alma mater, and I knew, just like I tell my clients, I knew the minute I gave it, it would be only a matter of time before my good friend Rich Collins, who's in charge of giving at GW, it did not take very long. And I said, hey, look, I'm not Bill Gates. I just gave a lot of money. Let me catch my breath. I've got to do something at Georgetown for Coach Thompson. And so we've been having this discussion, for a number of years. I do have to tell one sort of funny side story. It's nothing to do with GW, so I'm negotiating my deal with Syracuse, and they're asking me to give them $10 million. Now, I'm an entrepreneur. $10 million is a lot of money, and I wasn't comfortable giving that much. So while this discussion is going on, the NBA changes the rules. This is about 7-8 years ago. And they rule that if a player complains about the calls, he's going to get thrown out of the game right away. So I go to opening game of the season in LA to see my client Elton Brand play the Denver Nuggets, who stars a Syracuse guy named Carmelo Anthony. In the afternoon, Syracuse calls me and says, hey, great news. Carmelo just gave the school $3 million to build this Carmelo Center, this practice facility. How do you think we should announce it? And I said, well, you guys got to really be careful. He may not want to announce it because the minute he announces he's given all this money, his high school in Baltimore and his family's going to ask for more money and all the people he's helping are going to ask for more money. You may be lighting a fuse, so you better make sure he wants to announce it. So thanks, that's great advice. So, of course, the first night, under the new rules, who gets thrown out of the game in the third quarter? Carmelo Anthony. And so after the game, I'm in the tunnel going to look for Elton Brand. And as we pass the tunnel, I bump into Mello. And he knows I represent Michael. He's one of the Brand Jordan endorsers. He knows I went to Syracuse. But he didn't know he should hire me. That's the only thing he didn't know. And so I said to him, how you doing? He said, fine, how you doing? I said, hey, congratulations. I heard about the gift. That's really amazing. He goes, well, how do you know about it? He said, we haven't even announced it. I said, well, the school called me up, and they asked me, my advice on announcing it. He said, what'd you tell him? So I told him what I told him. He said, God, thanks. I'm not sure I want to announce this thing. It's going to really have a backlash to me. I said, well, that's what I told him. He said, David, let me ask you a question. Why on earth did they call you to get advice on what to do with my gift? I said, well, I'm negotiating with the school right now to make a gift on my own. And he said, how much did they ask you for? He gave $3 million. I said, they asked me for $10 million. He said, what'd you tell him? I said, what'd I tell him? I told him when Mello gives 10, I'll give 10. He hasn't given 10 yet. But I had to raise my gift. I'd like to thank Jeffrey Manns. Where is he? Is he here? He runs the Center for Law, Finance, and Economics. He's been a great coach for me to help me set this thing up. It's going to take some time. I want to thank my colleague over here as well. I'd like to thank my wife, who went to GW. She transferred from Syracuse. She was a better negotiator than me. She definitely knew she wanted to close the deal, so she didn't stay at Syracuse, came right down, and we got married in my second year. And I also like to thank my mother, Pearl Falk, who is a teacher, and is really the reason that instead of giving money to cancer research, my mother was a teacher. She taught foreign languages in Long Island, and she was my mentor. And when I give this money, it's my way of honoring my mother. And from the time I grew up, my mother was a first-generation American, a very, very demanding woman, a very loving woman, very, very demanding. I came home in high school, my first college boards, I got just under 1,400, which is probably in the top 1%. My mother didn't talk to me for a month. She thought that was unacceptable, that when you can get 1,600, you come home with 1,400, go back to the drawing board, practice some more and study some more, and come back. When I didn't get into an Ivy League college, I wanted to go to Cornell. My mother never got over it. We'd pass cars with Cornell stickers at the bottom, and she would audibly gasp like, get to Cornell. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me going to Syracuse. And my mom had an expression that she drilled into my head from the time I was young enough to remember. And as I had children, I repeated the mantra. It's my philosophy of life. I'd like to share it with you as we close. And that philosophy is always shoot for the stars and never settle for second best. And I think that's a great philosophy to have very high goals, be aspirational, and you're at a place that can help you fulfill those goals, but you've got to really want it, and you've got to really make an effort to go after it. It's not going to come to you in the classroom and knock your door down. You know, break the walls down and combine the academics that you have here at GW, which are first class, great professors with a chance to get out into the city of Washington, D.C., and become an entrepreneur. Thank you very much. Okay, now, does anyone have any questions or anything you want to talk about? If you don't, I promise I'll call on you. Like I've taught a few classes, so if you want to be quiet like this is law school, I will definitely call on individuals. I will not call on my friends. They're immune. They're in the zone of trust. Anyone have any questions?
Tell them to hold their hands up high.
Yeah, and grab a microphone because it's really hard to see in the lights. I'm chasing a fly ball. I got the lights in my eye.
Stand up.
Who was your first client, and how did you meet Michael Jordan?
Okay, see, I told the dean before the thing started, when you're in law school, you say, do you have a question? Everyone has like at least a two-part question. No one says like, how did you meet Michael Jordan? So that's a joke. It's true, but it's a joke. The fact that it's only 2 parts is encouraging. I was expecting like a 6-part question. I'd have to write it down. So my first client was a tennis player named Hank Pfister from Bakersfield, California. My first basketball client, who I did not recruit, negotiate for, but I wrote his contract, and I've managed him for 40 years coming up. There's a guy named John Lucas for the University of Maryland, who was the #1 pick in the draft. I represented his son. John was the first player in the history of the NBA thrown out for drugs and became the leading expert in the United States for athletes and executives in managing substance abuse problems. He's made millions of dollars. He's a very charismatic guy. In the day when I started in 1974. From 1974 till Garnett came out in 1995, every client we had went to a small group of schools where the coaches totally controlled. They were like the admissions committee, and they controlled the process where the players went from college and chose an agent. It was North Carolina with Coach Smith, Duke with Coach K, Georgetown with John Thompson, Indiana with Bobby Knight, Kansas with Ted Owens. And the coaches would tell you with no doubt whatsoever, no contact with the players. I don't want you to tell me that you happen to be visiting Wilmington, North Carolina, and you bumped into Michael Jordan's mother in the grocery store. If you do, you're off the list. That's it. So what would happen is the year would end, no contact whatsoever, and the coach would invite you in for 1 hour. And at the time, there were 3 other people they invited to almost every meeting, same coaches, and they were all really good people. When Michael came out of Carolina, there'd only been 6 people, because Dean controlled it so carefully, who had represented his players for like 25 years. He invited all 6 in, and then I use the word quote, he suggested to Michael that we were the people that he should choose. Now, the other people who wanted to go with us, he suggested that they not choose. So Dean was sort of like the Pope, and whatever he suggested to the players. I had a client in 1980 who became an assistant coach here for the Wizards named Michael O'Koren. And I saw him when I was 29 years old. And I asked him one day, feeling really confident, why'd you decide to pick us? And he like stumbled for a minute. He said, well, you actually came in second, but coach suggested you'd be a better pick than the first guy. So you realize that, the sword cuts both ways. So it was very, very controlled back then. And I liked it better that way because the players really don't know what they need. They don't know the job description of what they need to pick a professional person. And they end up picking their friends. That's why a guy like Magic Johnson ended up signing for $1 million a year for 25 years, and 9 months later, Patrick's deal kicked in for 3.2 for 10 years, and he never dribbled a basketball in the pros. That was probably the worst deal in history. But there are a lot of people who aren't very qualified in the business. Their entrance requirements are de minimis to be an agent, so it's a very difficult problem. Anything else? Yes.
why do you think Air Jordan succeeded when other basketball, I guess, shoe ideas failed and other sports really haven't succeeded as well?
For a lot of reasons. Number one, in 1984, when Michael finished playing at the University of North Carolina, he played in the Olympics. It was the last time the college players played the Olympics before the Dream Team in '92, and won. It was in LA, in the United States, before an audience, probably 1 billion people in the world. He absolutely annihilated international competition. There's the traditional joke that the only person in history who held Michael under 20 points was his college coach, Dean Smith, because he played a very disciplined offense, and Michael exploded in the Olympics. Nike was a fledgling company. They were really small. Michael did not want to go with Nike. He didn't even want to visit Nike. I don't know if have any of you seen the documentary with Sonny Vaccaro about shoe contracts? Sonny claims that he was the reason that Michael Jordan signed with Nike. George Raveling, who's a good friend of mine, he claimed he was the reason Michael signed at Nike. And after these guys had recruited the hell out of him for about 6 months at the Olympics and in college, Michael didn't even want to get on the plane and see Nike. It's like a coach taking credit that the guy's going to GW to play basketball, and he wouldn't even take a campus visit. So Michael wanted to go with Adidas, but this gentleman I told you named Horst Dassler had died. The company was in disarray. So he had this amazing exposure. He was the 2-time College Player of the Year. He hit the winning shot in 1982 against Georgetown, and he had this amazingly explosive style. Nobody thought he was going to be as good as he was. We forced Nike to spend $1 million the first 6 months on the contract to promote him. No other player had ever had his own line of shoes and clothes. Bird didn't have it. Magic didn't have it. Dr. J didn't have it. It was sort of unprecedented, and he just exploded on the scene. I mean, there's a very famous clip that we have in 1984, the first week of November. He's about to play the Knicks. He had just started playing in the NBA, and Brian Gumbel has him on the Today Show. He looks like he's 14 years old, and Brian says to him, there's a quote, "You are represented by an agency that is promising to make you the best promoted, best publicized young athlete in the country. Is that really your goal?" And Michael says, "Well, I would like to get the best that I could while I'm playing, both on the court and off the court." And it just worked. And the problem, it worked because it was natural. It was organic. And since Michael, everyone's been looking for the next Michael. There will never be another Michael. There may be another LeBron or a Kobe or somebody else, but that guy's got to be himself. And Michael wasn't trying to be the next Dr. J. He wasn't trying to be the next anybody. He was just trying to be himself. And so he's got a very high level of credit. His shoe today, if you took the shoes of every player in the NBA today that have their own shoe, if you took Kobe, LeBron, Kevin Durant, John Wall, Dwight Howard, Dwayne Wade, you add up all the sales combined of those guys and multiply by 3, they don't sell what Jordan sells in a year. His company is bigger than Under Armour by himself. Brand Jordan is bigger than Under Armour. And Under Armour is a great company. So it's just, it's a once-in-a-lifetime kind of a deal. We all got a little bit lucky. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Hello, I'm Ashley Briscoe. Adam Silver's thinking of limiting entry into the NBA to age 19.
I'm sorry?
Adam Silver is thinking of limiting the age of being able to go into the NBA to age 20. How do you think that's going to change the way young players enter the NBA, how they get endorsements?
Well, first of all, I think the endorsements are going down except for the superstars. Very few players. LeBron has 1 billion endorsements and Durant has 1 million endorsements. A couple things are going to happen, which is sort of interesting. And I'll tell you a very sort of comical story to explain it. For about 8 years, the salary cap was very flat. It was in the 50s. It went from like 52 to 58 over a period of 8 years, less than 1% growth a year. They just made a new TV contract, and so the cap went from 58 to 70 last year. It's going to go from 70 to 90 this summer, and the following summer it's going to be 108. So it's going to more than double in 3 years. And player salaries are going to go through the roof. So we have a client from Georgetown who just signed a 2-year deal. He went from $5.4 million to $15.5 for 2 years, and his next contract will probably be $35. Now, when you're making $35 million and someone says, "Have an appearance for you in Detroit for $25,000, you're going to say, "You want me to waste my time for $25,000 when I'm making $30 million? You got to be kidding me." And so to give you like an example, in October, the Charlotte Hornets played in China. They played an exhibition game against the Clippers. And I got a call out of the blue from these two women in the Philippines and said, hey, Michael's going to be in China. Do you think he'd like to come to the Philippines for one day to play in a celebrity golf tournament? I said, are you kidding me? Like, the Philippines got to be like 9 hours from China. I said, no, it's only like 7, and we can get him a private jet. So I already have him 3 private jets. One guy wants to go to Macau to go gambling, and one, it's a long ways. I don't think he's going to want to do that. And she goes, well, doesn't he love to play golf? I said, yeah, he loves to play golf, but, doesn't love to play in celebrity tournaments. They take forever. So she says, well, I said, besides, if he wanted to do it, you'd have to pay him a lot of money. And she goes, well, think he'd do it for $500,000? I said, I don't think he'd go next door in Florida to play for $500,000 to his house. I said, talk about big money. And she goes, how much? I said, well, I don't think he'll play for any amount. I just don't think he's going to want to do it. But if he's going to want to do it, it probably costs you like $7 million plus the jet. So she goes, there's no way we could pay that, which is why you say $7 million, because you know he doesn't want to do it. You got to set a price, make it easy. Next morning, I get a call from the Philippines. They got the $7 million approved. Now, that's not the funny part of the story. This is the funny part of the story. So I call Michael, and you have to know Michael. And he is like the ultimate needler. He's extremely loyal. He's affectionate. He's an amazing friend to me. But he never stops needling you. Never. It makes you stronger. So I call him up and say, MJ, I did not solicit this. We got a blind call the other day. Would you have any interest in playing in the Philippines in this golf tournament while you're in China for $7 million? And he thinks of it, and he said, David, can I ask you a question? I said, sure. He goes, you were at my house 2 weeks ago for a week playing golf. Do you think in the 2 weeks since we play golf, I've become indigent? I said, no. He said, why on earth would I want to fly for 8 hours to play golf with a bunch of guys like you for $7 million? I said, okay, I get it. No problem. We'll just say no. And so, I think as the salaries go up big time, no one's going to turn down $7 million except Michael Jordan, but guys are going to start being really selective on how they use their time because it's going to be chump change compared to what they're making in salaries. That's what I expect. If they're smart, that's what they'll do. Yes, sir.
So you've clearly been involved in a lot of successful ventures and have seemed to be able to predict the way the wind is blown. I'm curious, how do you identify opportunities and sort of navigate changing markets that are changing faster and faster?
Great question. There are certain things that are scientific and provable, they're ascertainable mathematically, and there's certain things that aren't. And in my world, most of the things aren't ascertainable with precision. When the teams draft players, nobody knows if they're going to be Michael Jordan or Sam Bowie, who went back-to-back in the draft. No one knows if they're going to be Kevin Durant or Odom, that went back-to-back in the draft. No one knows whether it could be Derrick Rose or Beasley, who went back-to-back in the draft. The teams like to make you think that they're really scientific, so I love to screw them sometimes. And I'm a Dallas Cowboys fan growing up. Dallas had 2 guys on the team 3 years ago that were first-team All-Pro. You know what round they got drafted in? No rounds. They weren't drafted at all. One's named Tony Romo. The guy's name is Austin. Now, these guys are supposed to be really smart, and they make glaring mistakes because it's not now. What's happened in the world of sports in the last few years, we've been inundated with analytics. You got all these nerds coming out of MIT that have algorithms for everything. And I love numbers. I like to tell them, what are the 2 places in our society, anywhere, where we use numbers the most? And the answer is Wall Street and the racetrack. And so my follow-up question, I don't ask the 2-part question, it's called the follow-up question, is why do people lose so much money on Wall Street and the racetrack when we have all these algorithms that people spend? And the answer is because once you have the numbers, then you have to have a feel. And guys like Warren Buffett have an amazing feel once he studies the numbers of what's going to work. That's why he's super rich. And most guys don't. The largest hedge fund in America is owned by a guy named Ray Dalio called Bridgewater. And they have a thing called the All-Weather Fund. And if you read Tony Robbins' new book about managing money, it'll tell you that this is like a foolproof, amazingly well, and Ray Dalio has $15 billion under management. This guy's phenomenally wealthy and smart as hell. And last year, the all-weather fund with the special construction was down 7%. So Nothing's foolproof, and numbers are great guidelines, just like past cases are great precedents, but they don't guarantee that things are going to come out the same, and you've got to have a feel. So when I look at opportunities, I'd be the first person to say, I don't have the answers, but I have my own gut feel, and I'd rather turn down a good deal than to do a bad deal. So I'm a little bit conservative because when I put my name on something, that's my brand. When I put my name on this program, I'm going to insist that the students be really highly. At Syracuse, we have the highest CUME on the campus for the kids that want to be in the fall college, 3.83. And when the school said to me, David, let's admit some more students. We got to raise the CUME of the whole college. I said, no. There's a reason that they're 3.83, and it's the same reason why people at Bugatti can sell a car for $2.2 million. You know, they came out with the car about 6 years ago with 999 horsepower, and they priced it at $1.5 million. Now there aren't a lot of cars on the market, new cars for $1.5 million. What happened? They made 50 of them, snapped up in a second, because super rich people want to say, "Wow, you paid $350 for a Porsche? I paid $1.5 for a Bugatti." Okay. After they did that for a couple of years, someone really smart at Bugatti said, "Hey, you know what we need to do? Lower the price? Hell no. Let's make a special model Bugatti and only sell it to 35 people," which they did. Now it's $2.2 million. Now, someone's going to come along and say, "Let's make 10 and sell it for $5 million." And so I believe what's called the philosophy of scarcity. If you take an economic resource and you make it harder to get, the price goes up. So as an example, this is a really good time to give this example. I'm an econ major. Okay, if I go to Safeway and I want to buy this bottle of water, how much does it cost me? Anybody? Anyone ever buy a bottle of water at Safeway? Or Giant. I'm sorry, I have the wrong store. You guys must have a deal with Giant. Okay, Giant food, I get it. How much does it cost to buy this bottle of water at Giant? How much? Okay, now, you might not have heard about this, but these guys at Channel 9 are forecasting we have this freaking ridiculous blizzard that's coming on Friday at 3 o'clock. So make sure you get home before 3 o'clock. You can work till 2, but make sure you get home by 3. What do you think this bottle of water is going to cost Friday at 5 o'clock at Giant? It's going to cost $10. Now, what's changed? We have like fairy dust in the water. We have cocaine in the water. Like, why is this water going to cost? Why is this water going to cost $10 on Friday at 5 o'clock? Because the economic circumstances have changed. So when you have an economic asset and you make it harder to get, the price goes up. So at my program at Syracuse, I wanted to keep the CUMES up, so we restricted the admissions. We've also restricted it so when the kids graduate, we can get them jobs. And so that's what I believe in. I believe like less is more. And so when I make judgments, I'd much rather turn down a deal that sounds great, but you don't really just feel it. You don't feel it. And you make mistakes. And you have to be in touch with yourself enough and get your ego out of your decision-making process where you know you're going to make mistakes, and then you want to learn from your mistakes. So I would say the worst mistake I made in my career was the best decision I made in my career, which was doing Michael's deal with Nike. And we did the first deal, and no one knew, whoever asked the question, whether a rookie player on a lousy team that had no attendance and hadn't made the playoffs in years could sell shoes. And their goal, which will blow your mind, was that we made the deal in '84, that in the summer between '88 and '89, they hoped to sell $3 million worth of brand Jordan, of Air Jordan shoes. That was their goal. They thought that would be like hitting a Grand Slam home run. And so because of that mentality, I wanted to cover the downside. I wanted to make sure if the shoe really didn't sell a lot, that Mike would make a lot of money. So we asked for the highest shoe contract at the time was James Worthy's we had done 2 years earlier. He was making $150,000 a year. Michael made $1.4 million a year in his first deal, and he had a small royalty. I thought we just killed it until we got the first year sales back. First year, $3 million a year for, we sold $130 million in year one. I said, wow, bozo, you just blew the deal. You should have asked him for $1 and 50-50. Now, I learned from that. I didn't have any idea what he could sell. So about 3 years go by, and we wanted to make a deal with the NBA to do a Jordan video. NBA had the exclusive rights for the game footage and for uniforms. So if you didn't make a deal with their exclusive partner, which is CBS Fox, you'd have to film a movie to have footage to put in the video. So the head of NBA marketing was a guy named Gary Bettman, who's now the NFL commissioner. He was a really smart, tough guy. He was in charge of NBA entertainment. And so I called up Gary and said, we want to do this video deal with you guys. We want to make 3. We want you kids to make 3 videos, not just one. And we want you to pay Michael $600,000 as a guarantee and against a 15% royalty. And I can't repeat, because I'm mic'd up now, exactly what Bettman said, but the gist of it is, we're like, why do you always have to be such a jerk in these kinds of deals? And so like, you know, what am I being a jerk about? He said, do you even begin to have an idea of how many videos we'd have to sell to cover a $600,000 guarantee? I said, I don't want you to educate me. He said, we'd have to sell 200,000 videos just to have enough profits to cover the guarantee. I said, and? And he said, the highest selling video in the history of the NBA is Magic Johnson, who sold 50,000 units, and the second highest is Kareem. These guys come from a championship team in LA. You know, they're really well known. There's no way we could pay you this kind of money for the guarantee. Now, having learned my lesson with the Nike deal, I said, hey, no problem. What do you feel comfortable paying? He said, half of that, I'll pay you $300,000. So you have a deal, but I want to go 50-50 on the royalties. He said, no problem, no problem. How many units do you think we sold over the next 5 years? Anyone give me a number? 4 million. We sold 4 million. Now, based on that, I thought if I was really smart and really clairvoyant, when I did Michael's first deal with Nike, I would have said, look, guarantee, forget it. Just give me $1 a year and let's go 50-50 and see how the thing works. But you don't know those things, so it's all based on feel. And when you err, and you're going to err, making a settlement of your case, you're going to ask for too much or too little, you got to learn from it. The most important thing is to learn from your mistakes. When I meet clients, I tell them they should hire me because I've made more mistakes than anybody in the business. Yes, sir. Yeah. Mike, I could hear you this close. My hearing really is bad, but this close, I think I could do it.
So there are lots of famous entrepreneurs who are trained as lawyers. You talked about your experiences with contract and IP. Is there anything else about lawyers and the training they get or the twist of mind that makes them good entrepreneurs?
Great question. I think when I was very young, I always wanted to be a lawyer, you know, and I wrote a book. And in my book, I wrote, the reason I want to be a lawyer wasn't because my dad was a lawyer, he was a butcher, never finished high school. It wasn't because I had a close uncle who was a lawyer. It's because in my generation, and you guys, I don't know if you had this in New Jersey, Larry, but in my generation, in 5th and 6th grade in elementary school, when you finished the year, they had these little like 5x7 books with colored pages. We called them autograph books. And you write real corny stuff in the book, sort of like as you're graduating. You write like too young to drink 4 roses, or all this corny, corny stuff. And this one guy that I really didn't know that well in my class, named Gregory Mallow, wrote in my book that I should be a lawyer because I was a good arguer. Now, only a guy who's never wants to be a lawyer can have as bad English as that in your autograph book. And you're preserving it for the rest of your life. I didn't even know where my autograph book is. So I sort of always want to be a lawyer. I think what law school does that's the most valuable is not to teach you about antitrust law, to teach you about contracts, is to teach you how to think. And so my mom taught me from the time I was very young, along with Shoot for the Stars, she'd say, a great lawyer knows the other side's case as well or better than your own. You know the strengths and weaknesses of what the other person's doing, so you could plot your strategy. And I think that when you learn to think that way as an entrepreneur, and you understand the market, the strengths and weaknesses of the market, it gives you an indication of where the holes are. If you want to provide a service, like look at Uber, okay? So I have a very wealthy friend named Devesh Makan who manages $14 billion for his clients. I've never met, he funded a guy when he was at Goldman Sachs in his 30s. Guy came to his office and asked him for funding for a project that nobody in the world would give him funding for. They didn't think that was going to make it. And Devesh had this feeling, wow, this is a really interesting project. I think I should fund this guy. And so he did. And the guy's name was Zuckerberg. And Devesh left Goldman, found his own firm, and they're just like printing money. And so he came to me, he wants to represent me. And I told him my net worth is probably less than his clients earn in interest in a week. I'm like at the low end of the totem pole, especially after I gave all this money to GW. Anyway, so he said to me, like, we're thinking about we're having breakfast in New York. And he said, we're evaluating Uber. And Uber was coming out, this is about 4 years ago, at $4.5 billion valuation. and they turned it down for their clients because there's no cash flow in Uber. About 9 months went by, Uber came back with the second offering at $17.5 billion, and they're sort of on the fence. They liked it better, but it still wasn't making any money, and they turned it down again. They got their clients in at 45, and I just got an offer from a girl I'm friendly with in Philly who works for JP Morgan if I wanted to come in at 62. Now, that's feel. If you're a lawyer, who would understand that there's a hole in the market between limos and taxis for a service of guys who don't even own their own cars? And I think that law school trains you to like look at the case, look at the facts, and figure out where the holes are, where's the weaknesses, and to find a way to exploit those weaknesses. No different than a coach in football figuring out how to run the plays. You're not going to run to your strengths. You're going to run. When a guy leads the league in interceptions, you know, that's the guy the coach thinks is the worst D-back on the field. Right, Mr. Harris? And you know, my favorite D-back of all time, Mel Renfro, never led the league in interceptions because he was like so freaking Mr. Glue, nobody would want to throw to him. So I think, to me, that's what I came out of law school with. You actually remember amazing amount of stuff that you never thought you'd remember when you were there. But I think the process of thinking is, I think, what was the most valuable thing for me. Last question. Huh? Are we overtime?
Yeah, we're overtime.
We're overtime. That always happens with me. I don't know. I don't know why.
That's outstanding.
Okay, fine.
We can give you a whole night. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give another round of applause for our wonderful benefactor, David Falk. And I'm told to remind you that there's going to be a reception. For those of you who haven't had a chance to ask questions and you have one, please join us for a reception that's on the second floor in the Brady, I guess this is the Brady Art Gallery, on the second floor immediately following this. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll look for you on the second floor. Thank you so much.
That was fun.